After 76 days adrift in the Atlantic, American sailor Steven Callahan was found alive.
That's a very common feeling among survivors. It's like at the beginning, your whole life's been flushed down the toilet. These are horrible experiences we have. It's not like we want to go back and have them again, but they also have these kind of irreplaceable, precious qualities. You learn so much about yourself and about the world. Definitely a spiritual experience.
In the 76 days you were drifting alone at sea, what was your most hopeless moment?
It really felt like death was kind of closing in, and
Steve Callahan, thank you so much for making time to be here.
No worries.
Steve, you were adrift at sea for 76 days by yourself on a life raft. And then before that, you were sailing by yourself on, I think you said, a 21-foot boat for a year. Can you take me to the moment that you were on your boat after that year and you suddenly heard the boat crash into something and starts to fill up with water? Like, can you take me to that moment, that experience? What did you think? What did you grab? What did you do?
I don't know. I'd been sailing and doing offshore stuff for a while by that time, and had gone across the north part of the North Atlantic in this little boat. So I knew the boat pretty well, and was basically in the milk run, so to speak, between the Canary Islands and the Caribbean, and had actually a lovely week of sailing, much more peaceful than the North Atlantic in general. And but on February 4th, the wind had gotten up. There was a low pressure system passing, and I wasn't too worried about it. The waves were about maybe, pretty big. I mean, a few meters probably, roughly 10 feet. And the boat was kind of carving its way across these waves towards the Caribbean very happily. But you always have to be kind of cautious in these scenarios. And I kept getting up and looking around and making sure everything was okay. And stupidly took off all my clothes at one point except a t-shirt and lay back down, thinking I might be able to get some rest for a bit. And suddenly there's a big bash on the side of the boat. Felt it kind of jump up against the waves, up to weather, and just a torrent of water coming in, real fire hose of water coming in. It's a small boat. I had watertight compartments in the boat that were designed to protect the most vulnerable ends of the boat, but it wasn't really designed to stay afloat if I hold the major compartment of the accommodation. So I knew the boat was pretty doomed, like, immediately. And I leapt up and tried to get loose a gear bag, but as the water was coming up really fast, and in the early stages of survival scenarios, there's wicked problems with time compression. It's really hard to know how quickly things happen. But the boat stopped almost immediately, probably filled with water within almost a minute. The bow of the boat was underwater, but because it dove down a little bit, it also provided a little bit of an air pocket in the back, trapped in the back, which with the watertight compartments kept the back of the boat just above water. And I had rocketed up to the deck. I thought, well, she's doomed. She's just going to go straight down. And so I'm on this kind of bucking bronco of a boat, tried to be carried overboard with waves and whatnot. And I got my life raft, which I had, and a lot of people thought I was silly. I'd bought a 6-person life raft that had been specially equipped for offshore stuff, and but it was a 6-person raft, and people would say, well, if you're sailing alone or maybe with one other person, why do you need a 6-person raft? But rafts are pretty small. Basically, it's 4 square feet per person in a raft. And I had read stories about, by the Baileys and the Robertsons, who had been adrift in the Pacific for I think it was 119 days and in 38 days, respectively, and those kinds of things. So I was pretty prepared with equipment, and but the package weighed about 100 pounds, and it said, make sure you put overboard before inflation while trying to stand on this thing getting washed off. Fortunately for me, overboard was pretty much on board, and so I floated it off to the side. Um, and jumped in, and then the boat, it was pretty obvious the boat was relatively stable at that point, and I could get back on board, and I knew what was on board, all kinds of water and food, and the ditch kit, which I had to leave behind, which had all kinds of goodies in it. So I pulled up on the side of the boat and got back aboard and dove down and got some really critical bits of equipment, a piece of cushion, a sleeping bag, my ditch kit, and then got back in the raft rather exhausted and stood by the boat till almost dawn. Now, during this whole period, I don't know, all kinds of things go through your mind. And that's part of sort of the core story of Adrift, really, is, we're not single dimensional animals, we're multidimensional. So, in my head, there was, kind of action according to my practice and training and dealing with other emergencies offshore and that sort of thing. And there's a weenie part of me that's, you're going to die, you're going to die. And kind of a rational part telling that to shut up. And even a part of me that was, frankly, amused when I got on deck, because I had a movie camera mounted on the aft part of the deck, and it somehow the electronics had fused together or whatever, and the camera was taking this really dramatic footage that, of course, no one would ever see. So a lot of things going on in your head at the same time, but just trying to focus on, being in the zone, as we say, and focus on what I needed to do. So I stood off in the raft, but it was like being in an auto accident every few minutes with, you get a breaker hitting the raft, which is tied to a very stable boat in the water now, full of water. And so the raft would get, like really crunched up. The raft itself is like, picture it as a couple of big inner tubes with a thin rubber sheet of reinforced rubber across the bottom, about 1/8 inch thick, and a little kind of a canopy or a tent stretched over the top of it. And that whole thing was pretty stiff when it was inflated, but it was like I was being like crushed in half, as the thing was crushed in on me, and water flying in everywhere and whatnot. I was worried that the raft might come apart, but then a wave hit and there was relative peace, and I looked out and found myself floating away from the boat, that the line I'd had tied to the boat, it didn't part, but what it was tied to obviously gave way. So there I was, basically middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I knew relatively where I was and where the winds and currents would take me, which would be westward towards the Caribbean islands, but it was a very long way away.
In the 76 days you were drifting alone at sea, what was your most hopeless moment?
That would have been, I don't know, well, it's a long time ago now. I would say probably around the 50th day. On the 38th day, I carried a survival manual written by Doolittle Robertson, who had been adrift with his family in the Pacific for 38 days. And he wrote this incredible book, Survive the Savage Seas. And to me, it was amazing, first of all, because they were super crowded in their little raft boat. And yet they were incredibly inventive. In these kind of scenarios, I mean, it's very common in survival stories where people, as we say, you stop asking what is it designed to do and what can it do in order to solve problems. So he was sort of Mr. Super MacGyver at sea, inventing things and figuring out a way to live. And so he wrote this survival manual that I had. And so on the 38th day, I had what I thought was a party, and I actually drank about a half pint of water, I think. And I thought, well, this is it. I've gone a lot further than I ever thought I could make it to begin with. And then on the 43rd day, I was living primarily off of Dorado, also known as mahi mahi, and they're found in tropical waters around the world. They're big, they're powerful, and that school would basically feed me at least most of my food through the journey. And they were also beautiful. They were creatures I honored. Were to me sort of, I don't know, spiritually symbolic. And so, I was fishing originally with a teeny little spear gun that I just happened to buy in the Canary Islands before I left. And I wasn't sure what to do with this. I kept putting it in different places in this little boat I was sailing, and it was really awkward. I hit my head on it or something, and I thought, oh, well, maybe it fit right in my ditch kit, and it just barely made it. And I'm glad I did. And at first, I would shoot it like a normal spear gun. That had problems because of refraction problems and stuff like that. And these fish being very smart and agile. And then, as I started catching them, one of the first things that happened is the power strap of the spear gun disappeared, got pulled off. So then I had to tie it together and develop ways of getting the fish close enough to me where I might spear them. And so I recognized they were not only my companions, but also were a danger to me, because I'm fishing with a spear through a big, powerful fish in an inflated raft. And without the raft, I was a goner. And I'd done okay. I caught several fish, and I can't remember which number this was. And it pulled the spear off the end of the spear gun, broke the end of it, the butt end of it, and kind of flipped around and ran the spear into the bottom tube of the raft, which was a total nightmare. Without getting too technical, the raft loses its shape, so it loses a lot of buoyancy. So instead of having like a foot of freeboard, you end up with a couple inches, 3 inches or something. And open ocean waves, normally a few feet, stuff like that. So there's a lot of water washing in and out of the raft. It was an absolute nightmare. By this time, I'd had lots of saltwater sores, these open ulcers that open on the skin. Things like that. So it was a very unpleasant time. I couldn't fish properly. I couldn't produce water properly. And I could not figure out a solution to this problem, which was underwater kind of. And I would get a temporary fix, and it would last maybe a couple hours, and then it'd get blown out. And I really couldn't figure it out. And it took me right to the edge, where I thought that was really going to be it. But as things would have it, it really felt like death was kind of closing in, and I kind of slapped myself awake, so to speak, and freaked me out. And so I went through all my gear. What do you have left? What can you do with this thing? And just thinking about it a little bit, and I just finally came up with the answer was this handle to a fork. I had a fork and a utensil kit for some reason in the ditch kit, a stainless steel utensil kit. So I could break that off. I made a pin that I could drive down through this patch that I made, which would really give a secure place to lash up. And actually, the bottom tube then ended up holding air better than the top tube for the rest of the voyage. But it took a long time and a lot of energy, and I never really recovered from that. From then on, it entered kind of another stage for me, which was just hanging on. You have re-crisis within the crisis, and that was my big one. I mean, I had a lot of little crises, but that was a really big one that I really didn't think I could solve. But I did, and that like the world,
Is there ever a sensation of like total nervous breakdown, mind fracture? Like can't contain the anxiety within yourself anymore, or were you too busy surviving?
Oh no, I mean the experience. I mean, we all go through ups and downs in life, and survival experiences are just, I don't know, on one end of the spectrum of that. Like I say, I go through incredible lows and incredible highs, and they can be packed right on top of each other. At 1 hour, I'm lying there and I'm feeling like I really am literally dying. I don't have any more strength to do this. I feel my body heat disappearing, and it's horrible. And then all of a sudden, I stumble across this solution that I should have figured out, a week beforehand anyway. But um, when I did, then it was like really. I mean, I often refer to the Tom Hanks movie Castaway, and there's he's struggling and struggling to make fire, and he finally makes a fire, and he's dancing around. It's like you just feel incredible, or you see sights and witness things that nobody else could see except in that situation. So there are enormous highs as well as the enormous lows. And in the enormous lows, I mean, there were times where, yeah, I just like totally freaked out, cursing the cursing the ocean and having tantrums, and and I don't know in Adrift. I mean, again, it gets back to this thing of us being multidimensional. I kind of divvy myself up into even when I was in the raft, I was kind of divvying myself up into a physical and a rational and an emotional me. And they all had different competing needs and desires. And um, sometimes, like, the emotional part would just totally overwhelm the rest. And even the rational said, yeah, fine, do it, get it over with, that kind of thing. And so it was everything, the full spectrum.
Was being adrift for 76 days a psychedelic and mystical experience for you, or is it more of a pragmatic, rational
Oh,
experience?
that's an interesting question. I wouldn't say it was a psychedelic experience. Definitely a spiritual experience, and I think that's a commonality with other survivors I've spoken with too. These are horrible experiences we have. It's not like we want to go back and have them again, but they also have these kind of irreplaceable, precious qualities. And so um, we don't remember the pain, of course. I'm looking back at this from many decades later now. I was 30 years old when I turned 30 in the life raft. Um, but um, there you learn so much about yourself and about the world. You can't replace that. And for me, and I think this has been a central theme in my life, whether it's writing, or the bits of art that I've done and whatnot. Um, to me, the real world is the spiritual world. I mean, I look around me. I live in the woods. I've always been comfortable in kind of isolated environments, wilderness and types environments and stuff. And you go into these things for freedom to a certain degree, but it's not totally free. You're very constrained by the reality of the world. If you're ashore, you're constrained by people mostly, but in these wilderness environments, you're not totally free there either. But it's a different relationship with the real world, and there are things about it that things are exactly what they are. It doesn't matter what you want them to be. I mean, if I'm in the life raft, I want it to be one thing, and it's not that. I mean, that's kind of denial, and so you're kind of forced to come to grips with reality. And to me, that's a kind of a spiritual thing as well.
Did you feel stranded the whole time, or did you ever feel at home while you were
Oh, a bit of
adrift?
both. I knew, yeah, I was technically adrift and starving and dehydrated, and wasn't going to have a happy end if I was there too long. Um, so it's not at home that way, and it's a constant tension. You can't let your guard down, and everything you do, every little detail of everything you do, can spell the difference between your life and your death. So it's really intense. But at the same time, it is a kind of home. I remember Maurice Bailey, when they, finally fishing boat in the Pacific was coming by and sighted them and was going to save them. And he basically mused about, there's a certain reticence to give up this. He's like a king of his little domain. And in my case, it's funny you mentioned Rubber Ducky, because actually I named my raft Rubber Ducky 4. I'd had some other inflatables before. So I was riding Rubber Ducky 4 and across the Atlantic. And I don't know, it was, I considered like all the fish that had gathered around this whole environment was kind of like my little town. I considered myself like the mayor of Duckyville, as I called it. And these were all my little doggies and my little citizens one of whom I would ruthlessly murder every 4 or 5 days or a week or so. So there is that part of it. And, as I said, I always felt kind of at home in wilderness environments themselves. And I like traveling like that. I like traveling lightly. So I don't know. In that way, it is kind of home too.
And the way that you drank water is you had like an evaporation device? Is that how you would convert the salinated water into
Yeah, I
fresh
had
water?
a few actually that were packed in. Two packed in the raft. One I carried in my ditch kit. The solar stills, which are these like balloons, these big balloons. I don't know how big they're. Probably maybe 18 inches, maybe a little bit less than that in diameter. And they were made during the Second World War for down pilots to hopefully distill fresh water from salt water. They're like little environments. You pour in some seawater at the top. It drips down through a little valve onto a black cloth suspended inside this balloon, and that gets wet, and the sun comes out and evaporates, and the condensation collects on the inside of the balloon and rains down into a little collection bag. But it all sounds simple, but as far as I know, I'm the only person to have ever gotten one to work in the real environment. They had a lot of challenges, and I had to figure out what was going on with them. I ended up cutting one up to kind of understand it as best I could. And the other two lasted. They would produce about, I don't know, pint and a quarter, maybe on a really good day, 2 pints, but they didn't produce that much every day. So probably on average, just over a pint a day, pint and a quarter. I didn't have much rains, but as I got further west, the rain was a little bit more occasional, and I could catch it. So I was improving those systems as I went along, because the solar stills had definitive lifespans of about, little less than a month, actually, I think. But they saved my life. We have much better systems today, reverse osmosis pumps and things like that.
Did you drink your own pee while you're on the boat, or did you think, what was your relationship to water?
Well, your relationship to water is really critical. And but basically, I can't remember now. Actually, I may have taken a sip at one point, but I knew it wasn't a good idea, and in fact, it's definitely not a good idea. Because you're flushing out all this stuff, including lots of salts from your system, so it doesn't help. It's like drinking seawater, and that was getting to be a concern towards the end, because my sodium levels in my body were quite high, and my potassium was low, and things that tasted quite salty at the beginning weren't tasting so salty at the end. So like with water, fresh water, it's like, well, if it's got a few drips of seawater in it, fine. But if it's got a lot, you don't really want to be drinking it. But so that was a concern. But I had just enough water for me. Basically, I had just enough of everything for me.
Did you feel confident in your ability to hydrate yourself and feed yourself, or did you feel like there was an inevitable demise that you were dwindling down to, like, you yourself were going to evaporate?
It was a slow decline, basically. No, I knew I didn't have enough. I knew I didn't have enough.
Yeah.
I really, practically speaking, I probably couldn't get enough nourishment. So eventually I would starve, and the dehydration was just kind of on the edge of things. So no, I was never very confident that it was going to happen. In fact, I always, as sailors say, you plan for the worst and let the best take care of itself. So I was very conscious of any time I had water that I didn't absolutely require, I would store it as best I could. I'd make little bottles of, from tubing that I had, or stuff like that. And so by the end of the voyage, I think I had about 8 pints of water saved, and which I would keep as long as possible.
Wow. And you were already catching fish because you were on your boat for the last year. So was catching your first fish from the life raft like an incredible, glorious surprise, or had you already been accustomed to catching fish on the boat?
Oh, I'm not that great a fisherman, and I didn't really fish that much from Napoleon Solo, the boat I lost. Um, no, I was focused on other things than fishing before that, but I mean, when I caught a fish, it was just unbelievably glorious. I mean, the first fish I caught actually was a little trigger fish. They're about, I don't know, foot long or something. I call them butlers or clowns. They they would flit around the raft and proved to be a little bit easier to catch. I mean, at least I got my first one. But when it was really the Dorado, the first Dorado that I caught, it was like a sort of a game changer. But it also, as I said, I learned pretty quickly that these are really fast and agile and strong, and so I had to take great care and prepare the raft, but as best I could, and develop a whole, kind of a movement in order to get them into the raft without causing damage and all that kind of stuff. So, um, but it really was the game changer. As I said, I think it was in the log and Adrift. It's like being in a prison cell and somebody throws you in a 10-pound filet mignon every week or something. So that was incredible.
And you can't cook the
No,
fish.
and actually it's an advantage to eat it fresh, especially the proteins fresh, because they take a lot of moisture in order to digest. And there's a lot of moisture in the fish. So I would cut them up, and I would eat things like, well, eventually I basically ate virtually every part of the fish except the bones, and I found that the stomachs were like eating little tires or something, so they didn't really do much for me. But contents of the stomach and the eyes and little discs between the vertebrae and all that stuff. And at the end of the voyage, that's what I actually prized. I learned a lot about how your body seems to know more or less what it needed. It really needed the fats and the vitamins and stuff in the organ meats, and the moisture from eyes and the discs. Um, but I did have extra fish. I didn't eat it all at once, so I would strip them up, and half of the raft was, I called it the butcher shop. I cut them into little strips and put holes in them, and it was very dry, as I noted before. So they actually dried in the sun into like little hardtack things if I left them up there long enough.
Hmm. So you created like a little town. You had the butcher shop, and you had like the farm, and you kind of created a world
Yeah,
for
yeah,
yourself.
basically. And I think we do that, I mean, kind of normally. Um, it becomes your life. And yeah, like these little fantasies, right? Like I would make myself dinners.
Did you
Now the dinner's all fish, but there'd be different parts that would be, oh well, this is dessert over here. The liver, the fresh fish liver is dessert, and for breakfast I would, take the bones that still had little bits of meat that was like bacon to me and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a rich fantasy life, I guess.
How elaborate did the fantasies become when you were 76 days out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? What was the most elaborate fantasy moments you had?
Oh, there are things about, you sit back and wish for things. At the big, found it interesting that every time I went to sleep, I dreamt of like food and drink, and it was always the stuff that my body really needed. It was like breads and fruits and juices and all this other stuff. I never dreamt of like sitting down to a steak or a big piece of fish. And early on in the voyage, those kind of dreams, sometimes they, in a way, they take you away from it. but they're also kind of horrible reminders. So at first, I kind of almost regretted those kinds of dreams or fantasies. And but as time went on, I got more fond of them, so, and especially for things about food. I thought a lot about food and what would happen after, once I got ashore, not if I got ashore, but once I got ashore, there'd be that. I would think about, stuff I wanted to do, mistakes I had made in life that I would like to be, if not correct, at least adjust to, and those sorts of things.
Did you have any regrets while you were on
Oh yeah,
the
tons,
raft?
especially during that first period, that recoil period. It's like, I've screwed up everything. I've been terrible with relationships. Was never good with money. I was, I was a young guy and had a lot of, I don't know, spirit, I guess, and but it never really accomplished that much. It seemed pretty. It seemed like a pretty empty life at that time. So that also gave impetus to keep, hanging there and keep going. Create a new purpose, and that's also a commonality I found amongst uh, survivors, is that, you know these experiences give us a different sense of purpose.
Did it ever feel easier to end your life while you were on the raft, or was there always a sensation of a desire to keep going?
No, I never really contemplated ending things. I thought there's a pretty good chance that they'd be ended for me anyway. But no, I don't know. For me, it was always preferable to struggle on. There was enough happening in sort of yin yang view of the whole experience. There was enough positive happening that I could see, like I say, awakenings, just being able to see stuff that, like these fish. One thing that happened early on is, they started kind of rounding the raft, and then I was shooting at them with the spear gun, and with about 24 hours, they knew exactly what the range of that spear gun was. But they come up and they kind of bushwhack me from behind, and I use that later on in order to lure them in to get close to the spear gun. But they knew I was dangerous. A lot of these individuals hung around, and I could recognize them. Well, some easily. Oh, that's one I tried to catch by line. It's got a string out of its mouth. That's when I hit that one there. I can see the scar. That one is got all these scars from this other encounter with something, and all of that. And so I'd see them all the time. They knew I was dangerous, but by the end of the voyage, there were times where I was trying to stay cool. Then by the afternoon, what I call the afternoon bake-off, and I'd be sweeping my arm through the ocean and splashing myself with seawater. And they come by, and more than once, I reached. They'd actually allowed me to touch them, and I can't tell you that was just like, oh my God. I don't know. It was, so you have these experiences, or just seeing the skies, incredible skies, and um, I don't know. They're, like I say, you get a lot of positives out of it, even if you are feeling like your physical part is dying and being kind of horrible. Um, so it's a balance. It's a balance of things.
What was the depth of loneliness like while you were out at sea? And did you begin to personify nature and fish and things on the raft? Like, did you have like Wilson moments from Castaway where you're not lonely at all because you've created this new world for yourself? What was the texture of loneliness like?
Well, I was pretty lonely. Even though I would, especially, especially as a youth, I was a pretty introverted kid. And, like I say, I grew up being pretty good with small groups, and, running around in the mountains or sailing. And, but I'd also done other, shorthanded sailing offshore and single handing. And, it's not my favorite thing to do, to be alone, but I seem to be okay with it. But it was like, especially throughout that recoil period and whatnot, I just realized, no, I gotta accept and through the voyage, actually, sort of an awakening, and then, it would be nice to be a sea creature. I'd like to be one of these Dorado, but I'm not. I'm very much a person, and this is not my domain. This is the world's greatest desert, among other things. And so I don't. I'm a visitor here, but I'm a person, and I really need to go back and do better with people, even though people are problematic. So is the ocean. So. Um, uh, I was lonely in that way, but it's funny because you talk about Wilson, and actually I worked on this film, Life of Pi, and the prop master there had been the prop master in that film, and he actually has one of the original Wilsons, and I'm incredibly jealous of that, or envious of it, because to me that's another the core part of a lot of stories is we all have our Wilsons. My Wilson was I guess the Dorado, really, in mass. They were my companions, and like all companions, they had their dangers and their benefits, and really they are the stars of the show because they fed me, they nourished me, they were my companions, they were spiritual creatures to me, they almost killed me, and in the end they brought my salvation because of the being part of that environment.
What kind of conversations did you have with the fish while you were
Oh, I don't know, silly little things. One of a good friend of mine says his favorite part is like I ask one to marry me, and even if she's attracted or something, that her parents object. I'm not colorful enough for them, and silly things like that. But it wasn't like I had to talk to them exactly. They were just an essential part of that whole world. Any more than like in the Life of Pi, right? He has the tiger in the Life of Pi. It's this boy on a lifeboat with a tiger. That's he doesn't have to talk to the. I mean, I guess he does talk to the tiger in the film and stuff like that, but it's not really necessary.
Did you have any peak moments of quote unquote awakening while you were on the raft?
Well, I kind of talked about a number of them, really. I don't know. Every day was an awakening. Like I say, I mean, a lot of things weren't like, I don't know. There wasn't like an epic moment exactly, unless you count things like fixing the bottom tube of the raft, and that being from probably the lowest point in the voyage to the one of the highest points of the voyage. That sort of thing. More or less, it was a long-term musing, I would say, about my life and my place in it.
What type of spiritual information do you think you could have gathered from your experience of being adrift at sea for 76 days that a kind of new age spiritual person is perhaps striving to gather, or suggestive to be striving to gathering? Like, is there anything that you think that you got from that experience that you could just never get from, I don't know, meditating, for example? Or do you think you can get this kind of arrive in the same place?
I think that you can arrive at the same place no matter who you are or what your life is like. It doesn't mean, I mean, we all come to wherever we are, and I'm sure that that's very unique to every individual. I grew up thinking a lot about concepts, I guess. I wasn't very good at memorizing things, but I was pretty good with concepts. And when I was at university, I studied psychology and philosophy. And so that gave me I was always interested in, I don't know, a wide range of issues, from the nature of knowledge to spirituality and religions and stuff like that. So I arrive at my own, and I think that actually comes out in Adrift, I hope. But it's open, people like people who read Adrift or talk to me about it, many of them relate to it in their own way and in accordance to their own life's path. But to me, I'm kind of a mix of uh, the accidents of my life mixed with my predilections, whether they be kind of genetic or otherwise. And so we all stumble through life to a certain degree and try to find our way into, I don't know, whatever we're all looking for. Um, for me, I'm pretty satisfied with reality writ large, but I also recognize that it presents a lot of challenges and heartache and all those things. It's just a part of it. And I guess overall, one of the biggest things for me, not just from my own experience, but talking to lots of other people, is that I have met all kinds of people who've gone through the most incredible things in their life. And those experiences are what they are. And it always fascinates me how two people can kind of go through almost exactly the same thing, but they come away with really different views and heads. I mean, for one person, a walk in the park, an agoraphobic person, a walk in the park can be, the hugest challenge. And for somebody else, it's just a walk in the park, that kind of thing. So that kind of fascinates me. But we all have to find our own path. And I think that you could find it from, contemplating your own navel or going out and mountain climbing or whatever. For me, it's important in my life to be connected to the natural world, which I think generally speaking, society has become more and more isolated from.
What was your relationship to comfort and pain while you're on the life raft for 76 days? Was it that I didn't know that salt sore was a thing,
Yeah.
but apparently your body is riddled with salt sores. I imagine sunburn. Like, what was your physical experience like?
I've been out long enough in the sun that sunburn wasn't a real issue. And unlike now, I had hair days, actually pretty heavy hair days. Um, so I was pretty well shot. And there was a tent over the raft, so I could get out of the sun. But heat was an issue. Heat was a real issue. Um, so on the edges of like heat exhaustion quite a lot towards the second half of the voyage. Um, the yeah, I mean, if you get a cut, it stays wet in salt water a long time. There'd be cuts that I had and stuff like that that wouldn't heal for over a month and that kind of thing. But they were pretty minor. The saltwater sores were a bit of a plague because if you're sitting in a salt saturated water environment, um, they develop your body starts developing these little blisters, like almost like little pimples in different places, especially where you sit, or your arms are against your body and stuff like that. And eventually these open up and they form skin ulcers, much like a cold sore or a canker sore in your mouth. And these would multiply, so I had hundreds of them. And there's a whole bit in Adrift about becoming a connoisseur of pain. um, um, so that was a part of it for sure. And especially towards the end of the voyage, I'm in a salt saturated environment. It's really in being ground into these sores all the time. So it's certainly not pleasant, but, and at times it would take me to the edge of tears. But I think one thing that helped me was not only having experience in that environment specifically and dealing with emergencies in isolated environments with limited resources and those practical kind of things, but I was worldly enough to have seen people who live in really dire straits for their entire lives. So um, those kind of people always kept me kind of a silent company. And when I wanted to break down or did break down or whatever, after a while I was like, buck up, things could be worse.
What does that mean to be a connoisseur of pain? You consider yourself a connoisseur of pain. What does that mean?
Oh, because I don't know. Like I say, I'm in my 70s now, and I've been through a number of experiences, including for 16 years having some pretty painful experiences physically. And every pain has its own quality. And where is it and how is it, and for me, actually, maybe this was the beginning of that, is just like concentrating on it and kind of Is this a stinging pain? Is that a burning pain? How bad is it compared to the yesterday? How, is it a deep ache? And what does that pain tell you? Is that, oh, that's just a saltwater sore. It's nothing to worry about. Or, oh, that's a new ache in my leg. Maybe I should worry about that. That kind of thing. So, you, I don't know. It has its own language to me.
What could you teach someone that hasn't experienced something like being stranded out at sea for a really long time about their relationship to stress and how to manage their relationship to stress maybe
Ooh.
better?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure I can teach anybody anything really. I just have my experiences. I mean, really, I have my experiences. I can relate them, and people can relate to them or not. And I'm sure my way of dealing with things is probably not preferred by a lot of people. Um, I'm not sure how to answer that exactly. There's so many elements in a practical sense. Taking things one step at a time. Don't hurry if you don't need to. Be really careful about prioritizing. Separate needs from wants. All kinds of things like that. And be prepared for as best you can for. I always say this thing about Murphy's law, where even the thing, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. And maybe you call it Callahan's law, is that even the things that can't possibly go wrong will find a way of going wrong, and at sea. So you kind of have to do that. The preparation, actually. I mean, there's a lot about that we've talked about once you're in it. But for me, I was very fortunate. I had a really good mentor as a young man. Sailing mentor, which helped a lot. The path I took, took me into doing offshore trips. And like I say, it's an isolated environment with limited resources, and you learn to deal with problems a lot because they crop up a lot. So all those things add into the preparation for the experience. I'm not the kind of guy who would just like not have any sailing experience, go down to the harbor and get on the first boat I see and sail it across the ocean. I'm too dull-witted for that. I need to take things step at a time.
How did you manage the pain? How did you manage the sores from the salt and such? Did you just have to deal with it, or is there anything?
I
Could you
just had,
create like
I just,
remedies from fish oil or something, or
no,
just have to deal with it?
I just accepted it. Yeah. Besides, rationing the food and the water, I had to ration everything, and part of that was I had a little medical kit, first aid kit, but I was very reticent to use anything in it because I didn't know, when are you going to get really injured and really need this stuff? So I didn't use it hardly at all until the very end, when I made myself a little diaper to be more stylish coming ashore.
Why did you make yourself a
Well, the
diaper?
only thing I had to wear was a T-shirt, which was pretty rotten by the end of it. And as I came up to the islands, the Caribbean islands, where I was about 60 miles south of where I was initially headed, which actually was good news for me. I kept trying to guide my way south, so that was super news. And so these, you local fishermen come up again because of the Dorado. They're the stars of the show. They're hovering around the raft, and they feed on flying fish, and so do frigate birds. And frigate birds have been hovering over the raft for days. And local fishermen, being bright guys, come out and they see signs of fish, and they came out and they found me. Um, so there I was in my little T-shirt, and they're going to save me. So I thought I would be, modest, and made myself a little diaper for when I came ashore.
Did you have a shift in your relationship of the concept of God while you were out at sea?
Not really. I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, I was a philosophy student. I thought a lot about spirituality and stuff way before I went to sea, and I've always been kind of comfortable with that. With my views towards that. I mean, to me, God was there everywhere around me. I mean, literally, to me. So, um, I don't know how could I describe it. I've described myself as a skeptical pragmatist. I've described myself as a scientific mystic. I think in terms of sort of cosmology and stuff, that best describes it.
Were you ever mad at God during the time? Or like, was there any ever sensation of like, how could you do this to me? Or how could I do this to me? Or how could, like, what was,
Well, that emotional,
were you
maybe
angry?
that emotional part of me, it would get angry and frustrated and stuff, like, the raft. Everyone, if it was really bad weather, sometimes the raft would almost flip over and scoop up all this water, and then I bail it out. And you're trying to not lose equipment and stuff at the same time, trying not to make sure your fish sticks don't get ruined. And it's just a really kind of a nightmarish scenario for hours on end. And there would be times where that emotional part of me would have a meltdown and curse and swear at the ocean and that kind of thing, even though the more rational parts of me were like, that's being silly. But yeah, but it feels okay. I need to do this right now. So there was that level of me that could get angry at things. But no, I didn't really blame God. If anything, I blame myself more than anything else.
Would you cry a lot or at
Not a
all
lot.
while you're out at sea?
No, not a lot, but probably a couple of times anyway. I had real kind of sobby breakdowns for, you know, 10 minutes and then kind of get on with it.
Thank you very much for answering all these questions. I'm
Oh,
sure you've been
you're,
asked questions like this before, but it's incredibly interesting to me. How would you manage your emotions during the experience? Or was it just kind of stay focused on what you're doing and emotions just manage themselves? Did you meditate? Did you do breath work? Did you exercise? Did you do theatrical interpretive something, expressing out emotions? Like, how do you manage emotions during such an experience?
yeah, I'm not sure as I manage them exactly. Again, there's this kind of core um, themes that run through Adrift. One of them being about this physical and rational and emotional parts of me, and they're all. I mean, they break out in little arguments amongst themselves. About like, should I eat this fish? And the emotional part's like, no, 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 you don't want to eat the fish. I mean, they're just incredible, and um, but the physical part wants to eat everything you can, and the rational part comes in and says, well, yeah, you got to fish, you got to live, so it's part of nature, it's part of what you have to do, whether you like it or not. And uh, but it just depends on the moment. I'm not a perfect human being, and different parts of me would take more sway at sometimes than others, depending on, again, the accidents of experience and what's actually happening around me.
Did you ever notice sexual desire when you were on the raft for 76 days? Like, did you wake up with a hard on? Like, what was that? What was that aspect of yourself like?
No, unfortunately, I wish I had a colorful story to tell you there, but I unfortunately
Really?
I don't. Um, you know, shagging the mermaids or something. I mean, there could have been something there, but no, unfortunately. In fact, it was funny. When I got to the other side and I was kind of yachto stopping, as we call it, or hitchhiking on boats back up towards the States, and there was a big ketch, Danish ketch, that gave me a ride that I'd seen on the other side of the pond on Napoleon Solo a few times. And so they were willing to take me on board, even though I was pretty useless crew at that point. And the the wife of the skipper, she was a psychologist, and she was really terribly interested in this this issue. And so she was the first person to really ask me about it. I said, boy, I wish, I wish it was something really dramatic to tell you. But basically, your body shuts down everything it doesn't need. At least in my case, it was like, nope, that's the end of the line. That is the least thing that you need to be spending energy on. I mean, I'm not saying this, psychologically. It's just what happens physically. It's one of those, like I said, dreaming about the foods that I, that I always needed, the kinds of foods that I needed, and things like that. Um, the body, the way, my upper body strength remained pretty good, while my legs, I wasn't using that much, really atrophied. Things like that. It was just kind of, you were asking about, I don't know, little epiphanies and stuff. That was an epiphany of the voyage, was how our physical cells control our mental cells as much as our mental cells control our physical cells. So, like, whether it's dealing with pain or any of these other things, to me, it's very much a two-way street, and you got to be aware of that, and manage it as best you can.
How would you use your mental self to control your physical self? And how would you use your physical self to control your mental self while you're out at sea?
Well, my physical self was telling me what it needed, which was, it was kind of a dullard, it was real kind of jock me, and it's like, "Oh, I want food, I want food all the time. I want water all the time, all the stuff it needs." And making these adjustments in terms of fantasies or whatever, and how that, in subtle ways, kind of blends into my emotional stuff and fantasies or whatever it is. But my rational self, I always looked at writing as a way, like a sounding board, a way of kind of stepping away from myself, and that was really important when people ask, well, what were the most essential bits of gear and stuff that saved your life? Obviously, the life raft, solar still, spear gun. Um, Lots of little bits and pieces here and there that you wouldn't think were important, cod line, things like that, which solves so many issues and you can't even find anymore. Um, Things like that. But I was able to, amongst my most prized possessions was a little log that I kept. I had these little 3x5 notepads and pencils. Um, and my favorite inventions of humankind are pencils, pencils, knives, and line. I was in a world totally dependent on all of them. And the keeping a log, not only practical stuff, keeping navigation notes and stuff. Again, normalizing as much of life as I could was really important. Keeping routines, hitting new routines, getting up, navigating, dealing with the priorities of repairs, and those sorts of things. Normal shipboard routine, if you will, or even if it's in a really humble little craft. Um, and keeping a log, where I could not only talk to myself about these practical things, but also reflect upon what's going on in the world around me. And wow, wasn't that amazing? And oh, I'm so devastated by this, and whatever else is happening. It was a really important tool for me.
Hmm. Did you experience moments of ecstasis while you were at sea?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by stasis, but if you think things are like steady state.
Ecstasis, ecstatic.
Oh, ecstatic?
No, 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 no,
No,
no, no, not stasis, not
no.
stasis. Ecstasis. Yeah. Did you
Oh,
experience any
like,
moments of, oh my
yeah,
God,
I think.
everything is so, it's so good. I feel so, I'm transcended my body. I've transcended my mind. Like I'm in just this like ethereal state of love and light and, all the things.
Not quite in that way. No. Um, yeah, no, no. There was always a part of me, and I think it's, to me, the experience overall, it was too tense for that, and I couldn't let the tension down until the very end, until I was actually in the, yeah, actually, even after I was in this little fishing boat going back to the shore. Um, Once my feet hit the ground, then that was it. It was whoosh, tension completely gone. But until that point, um, it's kind of like sitting on a knife edge over a canyon. It's just so tense all the time, um, even in sleep. And the thing is, even if you kind of slip into this, I slip into a daydream in the afternoon, and then all of a sudden the raft's being shaken around. I look down, this shark has grabbed a hold of the ballast pocket and is jerking the raft around everywhere. That kind of thing. It's just, you never know what's going to happen at any moment.
Were there, I'm almost done with these questions that you've probably been asked a lot of times. Once again, I apologize and thank you. Were there storms during the 76 days? And were there moments where you're like, oh, I'm going to capsize and it's over again?
Yeah, like I say, the first few days after I lost the boat, when the boat was lost basically in the middle of a bit of a blow, not terribly horrendous, but pretty heavy. Um, and when you're in a life raft, you're feeling every little bubble that goes under the raft. It's like, as I said, it's like living in a waterbed with a couple of kangaroos, um, and so it's pretty raucous, and it's just a matter of hanging on. That's the milk run, is trade wind belt. Once you get into that, it's relatively benign, but benign. What's really benign in a 50-foot boat is not that benign in a 6-foot raft. Um, but I did have, I think, one other sort of gale conditions in it where I was, in the raft would, I had a sea anchor, this like little parachute that would drag through the water, and I set that for the first couple of days just to keep the raft on its bottom. And even so, it almost tipped over a couple of times. And I had those conditions later on where I call them knockdowns. The raft didn't go completely upside down, but it'd tip up on its end and scoop up all kinds of water and stuff. It was pretty unpleasant, but I was fortunate it didn't go upside down. Although you can rewrite the raft, it takes a lot of energy.
Were your emotions reliable? Did you have bipolar esque episodes? Or was there a reliable arc of emotions while you were in that experience?
No, they were all over the place. It really depended on what's happening. And this end of the stages, once I got into, I don't know, it took like a couple of weeks to kind of reach this period of adaptation. Um, and then I was, producing a bit of water. I was catching fish, at least the beginnings. The raft was still in pretty decent shape and whatnot. And then I had a fair amount of time to kind of sit back and husband my resources. So um, were more sort of peaceful times of it, but I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question exactly.
No, it does. Was there, if there were chapters of the 76 days, what would you kind of refer to the chapters? If there was a chapter one, chapter two, and chapter three, what would the titles of the chapters be? You don't need to be too poetic. Did you break it down into three sections?
No, I broke it.
Did
I
you
broke
break
it
it
up
down
in.
into three
Yeah, no,
sections?
I broke it up into individual chapters, not according to the exactly to the stages of survival I refer to, and but when I got home and started writing this, I took all my little log and spread it out, and I put like what practically happened. It was this day, and I had water, I got this fish, and so on. And then the other notes that I had about what I was thinking and feeling and stuff, and I put them kind of in order, and they kind of fell into chapters for me in that way. But I'm not sure as I can succinctly describe each one.
Yeah, that's fine. Don't worry about it. The When you first were laying, were you? What time was it when you hit the whale or shark or whatever it was that took the boat down?
Oh, middle of the night, basically.
So you were asleep.
Yeah. Although sleep when you're single-handed is kind of strange. You can be actively dreaming, but conscious of the movement of the boat and the sounds and stuff like that.
When you struck whatever, call it a whale or whatever it was that you struck, did your mind go into, how would you describe the texture of your mind in that moment? Was it just complete panic? Did you not have time to panic? Was it like execution, get things done? Like, what was that experience like? If you had to summate like the feeling of I've hit something and the boat is sinking and I'm in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
No, an immediate, shock and jump up. I mean, I didn't even think. I just jumped up and as best I could and started getting at things. But all these other voices were going on in my head at the same time. So, you kind of put them aside. And my wife and I rewatched A Beautiful Mind the other day, and I don't know. It's about a schizophrenic mathematician. He's got these people who keep showing up in his life and causing all kinds of havoc. And in the end, because taking the drugs dulls his thinking so much, he can't stand it, and so he learns to deal with them. These fantasies he has, he sees them, but he kind of ignores them. And that's like the voices, I guess, in my head is like they're there. Like I said, there was even a part of me that was kind of amused by this, camera taking this really dramatic footage. Um, so they're there, but I was fortunate that I was able to. We sometimes call that psychological splitting. It often happens early on in these kind of crises. Um, we find that about, roughly speaking, like looking at oil rig fires and in incidents like that, about 15% of people have quick leadership qualities because they're able to do the psychological splitting to kind of look at the situation, evaluate it, and make a decisive decision about action. About 15% of people will be panicking, which is, basically running around like a chicken with your head cut off, or catatonic almost. And some of those people might even have to be restrained in these situations. And about 2/3 of people are able to act positively, but they can really use leadership. And people will do things like, this actually happened in 9/11, where, people were, planes hit, and people were like, oh, let's get together in the conference room and figure out what to do, when there's absolutely no time to do that. Or they go back to their desk and tidy up, those sorts of things, because they don't really, it's so overwhelming that it's difficult. And if you have training, like people we know really from, all kinds of oceanic training of people on oil rig fires and things like that, if they've gone through the training, their chances of being able to act according to their training and things like that go way up, and their survival rates really go up.
Amazing. When you got, so you had one moment where you saw a boat and you were shooting your flare, and that boat did not see you. Is that right?
Actually, about 9 ships passed me by, and none of them saw. I had a kind of an arsenal of flares. The first one was pretty close. I'd say passed within a mile. I could smell diesel in the air and feel the wakes and stuff like that after it went by. But none of them would see me. I mean, that's just a reality of being on the ocean and merchant ships that don't have big crews. They're not looking out all the time. They're steaming along pretty fast. All that has to happen is somebody can be in the radio room, rather out on the deck, actually looking in your direction. And even if they are out on deck looking in your direction, you're just so hard to see.
How was that happening, dispersed throughout the trip, or was it mostly towards the end when you were getting close to the crew?
No, it varied. I figured it would be some, shipping lanes are not highways exactly, except if they're really close to the coast. But even well offshore, middle of the Atlantic, it was I can't remember, over 2 weeks before I reached the shipping lanes. I didn't really see much until there. I saw some ships in the shipping lane, and I saw some towards the end of the voyage, by which time the flares were pretty much toast anyway. I think I only had 1 or 2 left. And so it was occasional, except in the shipping lanes, where it was a little bit more prevalent.
How much of a different person were you after you got back? Like, who was Steve Callahan before this trip and after this trip? Is there a distinguishable, distinct difference between the two versions of you?
You'd probably have to ask other people, to be honest, for an appraisal. I don't know. To a certain degree, a lot of me was strengthened. And to a certain degree, I came back, wanting to reinvent my life. So that's what I set about doing. I tend to be pretty impatient, but I was very patient to begin with, and never felt freer of anything. I just was not stressed about anything for a long while. But
how long did it take for you to start being impatient to things again after you got back? I'd imagine there's probably like a new car smell Like upon arriving, like nothing could bother you for a while, I
Yeah.
would presume.
I don't know. You know what? At the end, let's put it this way. When I first landed, when I first landed on Marie Gallant, I felt literally reborn. Um, and I don't mean that in a kind of, I don't know, neo-Christian way or anything like that, but I felt completely different. And like even for the physical sensations of color and sound, other than the ocean and my own voice, or oh, I didn't talk much actually, but um, you know, the clatter of palm trees and the colors of flowers and stuff were, you know, just sort of like super iridescent almost. And so it was like looking at the world through a baby's eyes. But I was also very naive again. I think I'd over romanticized people. And it took me a while to. It's a slow thing. Um, but you know, I did come back and try to be better at life in a general sense. And I think I did. You know, I got a wonderful wife, Kathy, and we've made an incredible life together and had all kinds of adventures. And so, in the end, I think I'm a better me, but I'm surely not a perfect me.
If you could have had anyone with you on the life raft for 76 days, would you have had someone, or would that have just made it more difficult to survive? And if you could have had someone, would you have had someone, and who would it be?
Well, difficult because there was no way I could produce enough water for two people. So at least one of us would have died in a practical sense. Um, in a lot of ways, I didn't want anybody with me because it was, you know, that's wishing a hellish experience on someone. I never really thought about it that much. And certainly not when I was in the raft. It's what it is. And I've never really thought about it that much since, actually, frankly. I'm not sure who that would be. I mean, there are a lot of people. Again, it's one of those yin yang kind of balances because unless I had figured out another way of producing or getting water, you know, at least one of us would have died. The raft would have been more crowded. All these things. On the other hand, maybe the other person would have seen a ship that I could not possibly have seen because I had to rest sometimes and all that. They probably would have much better ideas about how to solve a problem like the hole in the bottom of the raft. So you just you never know.
I really appreciate getting to communicate to you. It's really a meaningful thing for me, man.
No.
Is there any major takeaways, shareable takeaways that you've gathered from that experience that you still hold with you today?
Oh,
Or is this point so much time has passed? Is it still very like real and present for you, that experience? Is there PTSD that you could call around that at all? Or is it like what is your experience with that your relationship to that experience today?
I don't know. It has been so transformed in so many times, and you know, I'm not the guy I was then. I'm much older. I've had a lot more experiences, including other um, crises, death-defying crises. Um, uh, I it's really hard for me to answer. I can't separate myself from that life. Absolutely not, because it led me so many different places too. You know, I got ashore and I had been interested in writing, was teaching at a yacht design school, and we were writing our own materials. And so I was doing a bit of writing and editing and things, but then other people wanted me to write a story about it, and that led me into sailing journalism, and I won't get into all the fields that it took me down in terms of that, meeting people, even stuff decades later, like when I got contacted by Ang Lee and he wanted to know if he'd come up and talk to me about this crazy story, The Life of Pi, that he wanted to make into a movie. And I ended up working with him quite closely on the film, and hopefully bringing certain elements of this, of my old fish story into a new fish story. Um, and so I've met so many people, gone down. I've met some of my, if not, I don't really have heroes per se, but I so admire so many people who are really accomplished. And whether it was Thor Heyerdahl, I got to meet in Norway, and people like that. Uh, Went out to on a disparate part of it, went out to the Black Hills Children's Home that deals with kids, youth at risk, and met incredible people that are doing amazing work. So, I mean, how could I separate it? It's really, there was the me, and it's not like I'm a completely different person, but this certainly diverted the stream.
Yeah. I'd imagine, final question, I imagine you wouldn't, if there was some way to erase that from your past, there's no way you would erase that. I would imagine you would elect yes to doing that, or am I projecting?
No, and I think that's most survivors anyway. It's not that we don't regret things that happened in the experience, and I was very fortunate by being by myself. I wasn't like I met the survivors of the Andes plane crash some years back, who basically were given in an environment with zero food and really hostile environment, and ended up having to cannibalize the bodies of people who died in the crash and things like that, which I just can't imagine. But even them, speaking to them, I mean, I did a show with one of them, and we were talking about not only the horrors of experiences, but the things of value with them. And he said, he just summarized it. He said, sometimes I just wish I was back in the mountains again. And I thought that was an incredible statement. And so it's like that with me. I was very fortunate. I was by myself. Nobody died. I sacrificed some, really valuable fish, at least valuable to me. But again, we go through these experiences, and despite how bad they are, we see things and learn things about ourselves and about the world that we could only experience in that way. And I saw not only was I in pain and these other things, but I saw incredible things, and felt very deeply about my relationship with the natural world, and how much I'm not the star of the show. I'm just this like little teeny piece that fits in here, and I'm blessed to be able to have that. So that's all pretty priceless stuff to me.
Is there anything else final words to share with people before wrapping up?
No, I can't. I think that's it. Thank you for your patience.
Like you for your patience.
and sticking it out. I'm glad we got this done. I am glad that we got this done finally. So, I was wondering there if it might have to be postponed to another day. So I hope this works out for you.
No, we made it. We made it happen. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. That's it. That's all. I'll see you next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed that episode, you might also enjoy this episode over here, as well as this one over here. Thank you for subscribing. Appreciate you. I'll see you in the next video.